Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I think in fairness, I thought I was told I had 3 minutes. I may be mistaken in that.
You'll gentleman 3 minutes.
I owe you, sir.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
With that in mind, I would just say, first off, indeed, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your work and the leadership's work in indeed providing this time for this debate. As was just stated by my colleague from Texas, I don't think that there's a more sacred vote out there for members of Congress than on issues of war. I mean, in its balance hangs life and death. In its balance hangs all kinds of financial and life considerations. In its balance hangs how allies are going to view our actions going forward. This is an incredibly important subject, and indeed, I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your work and the committee's work on this matter. That having been said, I rise, though, in opposition, respectful opposition, not to your work, but to the actions of the President, because I think his approach has been fundamentally flawed. And I say that first off because I think that step one has to be on the in the issue of war, congressional approval. And I think it is so important, based on what the Constitution said, for the President indeed to come to the Congress to ask for a declaration of war, and he's quite simply not done so. I would say then, okay, on what basis does he move forward? And if you look at what he and others have said, they hang a large part of their hat on the authorization of 2001. And I think what's interesting here is what the President himself said just 2 years ago. He said the AUMF is now nearly 12 years old. Unless we discipline our thinking, our definitions, our actions, we may be drawn into more wars we don't need to fight, or continue to grant presidents unbound powers more suited for traditional armed conflict between nation states. I think that the President was right. I agree with the President. And yet members of the administration have been coming to Capitol Hill, and they have been basically making the case that with that AUMF, they have the authorization to go, in essence, another 25 years. I think that that, again, is mistaken. These are not blank checks. Each war and each war effort needs to be debated in isolated form based on that effort. I would thirdly say that I think that this effort is fundamentally flawed because of what von Clausewitz talked about with regard to war. I don't think at the end of the day we're going to affect the military center of gravity of our opponent. Because if you look at the center of gravity, I would argue it is their faith, it is their willpower, it's their motivation. And as we saw with the Nazis and the bombings on London, bombing alone will not change will. In some cases, it strengthens resolve. And so what you're left with is, in the void that's created with bombings, is boots on the ground. But in this case, we're leaving that precious job of boots onto the ground to what are described as moderate rebels, whatever that is, and an example that we have to look back in what just happened. If you look at the activities of this spring, 1,000 ISIS soldiers routed 30,000 trained soldiers after we've spent $25 billion in that process. I think there are a whole host of mistakes and errors in this plan and would respectfully rise in opposition to it. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.